Tada, Stephen. I think the recent slides that Stephen presented on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are a perfect context and background for Danny's presentation on the unbearable cost of the conflict and the occupation. Danny will mainly talk about the harm to the Israeli democracy, talking about or focusing about corruption, rule of law, and human rights. So Professor Danny Bar-Tal, please.
So I am really happy and for the occasion to be and honor you. And I found that we have two common bases. One, that we live in Herzliya, and second, I just discovered that both of us studied in University of Pittsburgh, right? So I just visited Pittsburgh this summer, kind of coming back, and it was a fantastic experience. And we also have one clear theoretical crossing, because as we heard, a number of presentations stresses one consequence on conflict, and I also obviously recognize, and I suggest that is an individual and collective challenge that needs to be addressed by authorities, one of the important ones, and indeed they address it, among other steps, and this is my point, by constructing conflict supporting narrative, as you will all hear. So I thank you again, because by inviting me, you forced me to prepare a new presentation. Therefore, I will be dependent a little bit on the paper. And I had for a long time all kinds of ideas, and it was an opportunity to conceptualize them in more a firm way. And I immediately want to say that my presentation is very different from the ones you heard through the 2 days. I do not have to share with you experimental studies, but I will share with you evidence based on my eyes. I can read reports, books, documents, newspaper articles, and then prepare the presentation that you with well verified data. So let me go into my journey. I even don't know. I finished it at 2 o'clock in the morning, so I am not sure really how long does it take. But I would like to start with basic assumptions, and I want to say that the conflict, as well as occupation, although it's called dispute, cannot continue or cannot manage without a heavy price from the Israeli society. And I am leaving the Palestinian one. It's obvious that they pay a terrible price, but I want to focus on the so-called strong side, and it pays, but we know that it is hidden, and we very rarely hear a discussion, public discourse, papers about the heavy price that we pay. And I know I prepared a brochure, and we found 28 domains in which Israeli society is paying all kinds of prices, including socialization of children. I'm not talking mental health, about really losses, economic, etc. But shh, let's not talk about it. And and one of the very serious blow is Israeli democracy. I am saying that is inevitable. It cannot, and this will be my case that I will try to convince you. Israel is paying, and don't blame only Netanyahu and Ikunis and Yariv, and it is impossible to lead bloody conflict and occupation without hurting democracy. So this will be my case. And I would like to make 4 arguments that will be discussed. I will not present them. Let's go one by one, and I will develop them. And the first one is the following. So the mere nature of the occupations require measures that negate the principles of democracy in violation of human rights. It's essential. I don't think that I am saying a big chokhmah, but anyone that reads history and will go through any occupation, even from the Romans' time up today, will find that it is essential part. And I would like to say that there are really two claims. And one is conventions of occupation. And we have to know that there are conventions, that really civilization is moving up and tries to organize and manage in some ways the occupation, and there are certain rules, beginning with Hague in 1907, and then in 1949 with Geneva, and what is allowed and it was not allowed, not what was going on in 13th century, 14th century. You could occupy, murder all the men, rape all the women, and be happy very much. So civilization is moving, and there are rules how the occupation should be managed, and it cannot be long. And I want to say that we do not have many occupations that go for a long period of time. And you will be surprised, right? Because there are several conditions. One is whether it is wanted or unwanted. Some occupation, maybe I will surprise you, are wanted. Really, in Cyprus, the Turkish community really is very happy that Turks came and saved them. And the same case is going in Estia and other places where it is wanted. At the moment, and then there is another condition, to what extent you treat the occupied population differently than the occupiers have as the rights and duties. And you will find that maybe it's, ironic or paradoxical. For example, Tibetans have the same right, or don't have the same right as Chinese, but they have the same right. And you will be surprised that there are only, at the moment, only 2 unwanted occupations where the occupied societies do not have the rights. One, And the second one, I will tell you, maybe you will not guess, is West Sahara, where Moroccans conquered and maintain, and there are very similar situation. They try to change. No more, for unwanted. So this is important point to understand. And the second one is the story of occupying the occupied territory. So we know Morocco is trying to do it, Israel is trying to do it, but it is not allowed by the rules or conventions of Hague and of Geneva. It is not allowed. And I know that Israel has all kinds of tricks and always finds legal professors, but I can tell you now that almost every country on this world considers the situation as occupation, and even the Supreme Court decided under Shamgar to treat it as belligerent occupation, although it's not required. So it's a kind of game that we have to find. So on this level, Israel is violating really international conventions, and it can be seen as breaking laws that are cornerstones of any state that desire to be part of the legitimate and democratic international community. So I know that our government does not understand this and is very angry when it's criticized, but it's a very basic point that most of the Israelis unfortunately do not understand and should. One point. The second point is violent nature of occupation. Unwanted occupation is by nature oppressive. You will tell me any unwanted occupation that was not violent. Try. Jews in 70 AD, Thracia, when? Poland, what? No, you are not going to find. Because when a nation is occupied, it always begins a resistance. In a different way. It may be by non-violent way, but mostly by violence and what we call terrorists. I don't know if you know, even during Mandat time, many of what we glorify, Lehi people, Etzel people, were labeled as terrorists because they performed violence. They murdered Arabs, they murdered British, and carried violent acts, very inhuman, throwing, for example, grenades into Arab markets. And this is their law. Happens everywhere. So then there is a cycle, because the occupying society tries to prevent it and develops a control system and surveillance system. And I don't know if you know, at the moment there are in the system about 30,000 Palestinians who were forced to be informers, collaborators, because Israelis have the power. If you want to get a permit work, if you want to send your father to hospital, this is a way to press, and it is very efficient. But also, the occupying power is using a lot of means in order to control, supervise, to prevent, to really punish all kinds of punishments that are not allowed, like collective punishments. And we know that is used, published in the papers, we don't understand exactly. So there are violations on a very large scale of human rights. We know the Declaration of Human Rights, Israel signed, and it's another very important cornerstone that Israel cannot be fully democratic when serves or action and function as an occupying force. But let's go further. I want to provide some basis, which is very important to understand. When you carry a conflict, bloody and lasting, when you carry occupation, you need justification. The days when a prince gets up in, let's say, Siena, and decides to take Pisa and doesn't have to explain to his Swiss soldiers why and he is going to do it, and that any leader, any government that is carrying a conflict and occupation must develop a narrative that is justifying the act in order to mobilize the members to participate in the conflict. So I want to tell you a number of themes which are very important. One of them is justness of goals. And we know that the return of Jews to Eretz Israel after 2,000 years, which is in fact the Zionist narrative, is very important. And it is based on historical basis, religious basis, national basis. And Jews believe that the whole Eretz Israel exclusively belonged to them. And when I did a study trying to look through platforms, I must say I was surprised because except Meretz, all the other Jewish parties, including Ma'arach and Mifleget Avodah, this is the basis. It's all Eretz Israel that belongs to us exclusively, and we are ready to give up certain parts in order to have peace. And we have security, which are very important. Dangers that surround us. I think that the metaphor, villa in the jungle, is a great one. We can thank really Ehud Barak because it provides in one really metaphor the feelings that most of the Jews have. Animals, wild animals around, beasts, and we are in the jungle and they really want to exterminate us. And it's well expressed in all the speeches of all the leaders that you just want. And then we have delegitimization of the Palestinians. We cannot trust them. They are not partners. They are blamed for the conflict. They are blamed for the atrocities. And it's a permit to harm. Delegitimization by nature is really denial of humanity and the permit to harm this category of group. And we have positive collective self-image. I don't have to explain. The most moral army in the world, you know, that we have is very important one: morality, courage, heroism. Again, I could really bombard you with statements by our leaders. And what we have is self-victimization. We are the sole victims. And what is important in this is that there are 2 points that are very important, which really derive from the collective self-victimization. One is called moral disengagement, and the second one, moral entitlement, and they derive directly from the perception, self-perception, collective perception, as being victims. One says, we were victims in the Holocaust, in the 2,000 years, and therefore people disengage from moral consideration. Do not take moral consideration. Don't teach us, as Netanyahu says again and again, you do not have the right to tell us what is moral and what is not immoral when we were in Auschwitz and you did not bomb Auschwitz. And the second one is moral entitlement. We are allowed, because what did happen to us, to carry even immoral acts to some extent because of our past. And those are very important principles that you will see in few moments when we will go. So let's leave this one. But the point is, and it touches directly on what I want to convince you, that the authorities make efforts to keep this hegemony, and we are in certain way in regression, because during the 50s, 60s, 70s, these themes were hegemonic. There was no attempt to provide an alternative narrative. Matzpen, the people of Matzpen probably could sit here around. This was all. Today, obviously, it's a very different situation. But it began only in the mid-70s. So today, after there was an alternative narrative, we are in a situation, and this is a way to understand what is going on, when efforts are made to keep the hegemony of the narratives that I just described and prevent dissemination of alternative narratives. And there are all kinds of societal mechanisms used by the government that on the one hand try to achieve these goals, but on the other they harm really seriously the nature of democracy, because they curb the freedom of expression and they curb pluralism, which are foundations of democracy. So let me just go very quickly. This is the argument. The wish to continue intractable conflict and the occupation necessarily require violation of fundamental principles of freedom of expression and pluralism. So, by the way, it's not only here. We could find it in 50s and beginning of 60s in France. We can find it in Turkey. We can find it in Russia. We can find it in Rwanda and Cyprus. This is something that is inevitable. So what are the ways, the societal? I will go very fast. Control of information. As you know, I will not elaborate. Discrediting counter-information. I am sure that the Israelis know immediately what I am talking about. Any information about possibility of talking, negotiation, a peace, etc. Delegitimization of the opposition. You must be aware that one of the most successful acts is delegitimation of the left. It began in 1997 with Netanyahu, that they forgot to be Jews, and unfortunately Gabay repeated this nonsense, and it penetrated into all the, I would say, veins of the society. People are escaping, leaders are, organizations are escaping from the label to be, which is legitimate in any democratic society, to have different views and to be plural. Ooh! Monitoring, punishment. Monitoring, yeah, you are monitoring, I am monitored. I am on the list, academic monitoring, NGO monitoring, who is saying what? Punishment. Remember Regev, our Minister of Culture, that tries monopolization of patriotism. Who is patriot and who is traitor? If you express leftist, you cannot be patriot because you are Arab lover, self-hatred, etc., etc. So, all these societal mechanisms are used, and we try to silence alternative ideas and narratives. It goes in schools, it goes in organizations. They try to do it with academia, as you know, and they obstruct fundamental values and principles of democracy. But it's not enough. Let me go to something that is less obvious and maybe you know less. I would like to claim that as a result of the really dominating narratives, Israel, and seeing them as sacred and very important, the government of Israel was ready and various institutions to violate laws of Israel and laws of international community. I want to tell you about 3 cases in fast. Which are based on these principles: justness and sacredness of Israeli governments to have the occupied territory, the legitimization of Palestinians, self-collective positive image, and, as I said, collective image on victimhood. And I will go over them. 1, tortures. And I was so interested in this case, only now, Zahava gave me the opportunity to enter deep. Think what was going on. For years, story was that Palestinians complained when they were tried, and I'm talking between 67 up to 85, that they were tortured, and their testimony was forced on them. So immediately there was a kind of sub-trial. And in this sub-trial, there were lawyers, Shabbat investigators, and physicians who were examining the people. And always the story was no torture. Until came Moshe Landau, and in came their tortures. Not only tortures, but in this scheme, perjury, participated organs of physicians, legal forces, Shabbat, police, knowing that they were lying. And the question is whether the judges knew. I say yes, because they are Israelis and I am Israeli. And I never trusted. And everybody decided to play and lie. And then they issued that only it's possible to apply kind of reasonable force. But then, in 1995, Miriam Ben-Porat said, nonsense, they continue to torture. And I can tell you now, they continue to torture until today. And you have number of reports, which I went tonight in order to find, 2009, 2015, and even Amnesty about torturing young children. So this is one case where we have a corruption, societal corruption. I am not talking about individual corruption, which is always takes place for permit, a soldier may sell something. I am talking about system corruption. Second case, so maybe I will, how much? Are you with me? This is with the protectors that I have? I can negotiate. Grabbing Palestinian land, which means when I am taking Palestinian land, I am not only talking about grabbing Palestinian land by declaring that it's a state land. We know, everybody that reads the paper know that the Israeli government, authorities, armies is cooperating in grabbing private Palestinian land in different way. And it goes on, Palestinians then are denied access to various lands because of the wall, as you know, fence, and they cannot enter. And it is really exploited. If any of you, I saw how does it work. I really feel ashamed when an old Palestinian is waiting 2 hours until a soldier will come and open the gate. And he comes whenever he wants. So a Palestinian that has a land between the green line and the fence cannot cultivate his land because he depends on the soldier. I don't know if you know, 20% of the West Bank settlements have been constructed on private lands that were expropriated for security needs, and I will tell you the story in a moment, because it's also another system of corruption. Formally, by the way, the data you can take from the Israeli civil administration. You don't have to go to B'Tselem or any secret organizations, traitors. You can go to data of Israeli civil administration and read that in 2070, 3,455 houses in the Jewish settlement in the West Bank were built on a private land. So how do you deal with this? With the law. Here is a law that passed in the summer, that we know law of Esder, which is again way of grabbing Palestinian land. And then we have a masterpiece by Talia Sasson. Anyone that read it, he cannot be but outraged how 100 outposts were built illegally against the Israeli law with the cooperation of the Israeli government and authorization. And then you know a little bit about Chativa Leitiyashvut, what is called settlement division. You don't want to know, because it's really a corruption that you cannot imagine how they divert money illegally, etc., etc. Huh?
Sorry, but I have to give
2 points. Okay?
Please. I'll sit here.
You're not being fair to the next speaker, then. So
I'm sorry?
It's about Gilad. I guess he worked hard to...
Yeah, okay. So just we finish 3 points. Gilad, people will stay. I will help you. You know, I'm sorry? Okay, I just want to make 3 points. One is about the collaboration between the government, the Israeli army, the Supreme Court regarding the Palestinian state, because the army was lying to the Supreme Court, saying that this land is needed for urgent military needs, and it was transferred to civilians immediately after that. And it was collaboration that went on until Alon Moreh, when they had to invade other. And next point is extremely important, but I just want to say that Israel cannot claim democracy after 50 years of occupation. You can look here, we have at the moment 5 categories of residents between the river and the Mediterranean Sea, with very different rights and duties. Therefore, anyone who says that Israel is democracy is really negating the reality. Just let me to continue, to finish. Final ending of the occupation.
I'll have to push you.
You do not have to agree to the hard arguments, but just by listening to them, you may open your mind and use the opportunity to examine your held knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny.